Okay.
Oh,
Oh, let's never say we ever went there and never go there again. Um, Hello, everybody.
hi.
I may or may not edit the proceeding out with Camtasia. It's Matt and Dan, Matt from the Matt and Dan Show, and we have a special, somewhat holiday-ish end of year kind of theme.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and just in case anybody's wondering, I unclever AI backgrounds. So in this
Hmm.
case, I thought World War One, Christmas in the trenches. It was the second thing I thought of, and that's the one that it gave me the best results with. And
Okay.
also, we have a guest on the show. We don't normally have guests on the show, but this is a fan. And do you know why there's a fan
Ah,
in the background? Do you know why there's a fan in the background, Dan?
why is there a fan in the background?
Because this is our single fan. We have at least one fan
We do have one
for this
fan.
podcast. So I would just like to say thank you, fan, in World War One era before you were properly invented. Thank you very much for listening and thinking positively or not about the 16 or 15 episodes that we've got up till now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and friggin' peace in the Middle East. So, why don't you tell us about the topic today, Dan?
Well, I was thinking since it's getting around the end of the year, and I hate to say we're at that age where a lot of our sort of cultural icons are kind of starting to pass away, but um, it's getting towards the end of the year. I feel like this. And I was thinking it might be nice to do like an in memoriam episode for some big artists that have passed away during the year 2023. There's a couple that have sort of happened as we ended up talking about them on the show. Like Dave Jolicoeur from De La Soul and Sinead O'Connor, and also I guess Sakavi from the Japanese band Gizem, the who we referred to as the Japanese Gigi Allen at the time. But yeah, who all passed away, all happened to pass away this year. And just when we were spitballing ideas for our next couple of shows, there was another big passing that happened to happen around that time. I figured to talk about it a little bit later. So I figured might as well do an in memoriam episode for some sort of big name folks that we lost in 2023.
It's well
Which
into
is a
the
real
12th.
old man kind of topic, but what are you gonna do?
Well, it's we're 12 months into the year at this point, and the body count is
Mm,
increasing. The annual body count, which
yeah.
like it or not, we all pay somewhat morbid pop culture attention to. So
Hmm.
I'm sure there's going to be somewhat overlap on what our people are, at
Hmm.
least in a couple of instances. I'm going to say. But I guess I'll just start out with asking you, Dan, who's the first on your list? I'd like to know.
Okay, first person I was going to mention on my list is somebody that passed away back around the beginning of March of this year, and that is Glenn Lockett, who you might know more better as Spot, who was the producer of a lot of the early SST record stuff.
Friggin'
And
A.
and he also had like a cool little like second act in punk rock kind of a little later on around the turn of the millennium that I'll get into, I guess, in a minute. But yeah, Glenn Lockett, he was I didn't know until I started looking this up that he was the son of one of the Tuskegee Airmen, like one of like the Black World War II pilots.
Yes,
Um,
that's
yeah,
right. I not to barge in, but I'll just say that if anybody's really interested in sort of because actually, okay, we're talking about overlap, and that I didn't have him in any specific order, but he's within my six people that I sort
yeah,
of had this.
okay.
And if anybody's interested in like kind of the Tuskegee Airmen and some other aspects, it's pretty well documented in the awesome book by Jim Ruland,
Mm,
the gentleman who wrote, he co-wrote Keith Morris's autobiography. He co-wrote Bad Religion's autobiography, and his book about the SST. Corporate rock sucks. The rise
yeah,
and fall of SST records has a whole bunch of stuff about Spot because you can't tell the story of SST without telling the story of Spot, and you can't tell the story about like American popular music because of Kurt Cobain and his friggin' interest in all that stuff. So really, it's like friggin' the quintessential American story with that guy, really.
Exactly. And he was a huge part of the sound of all of these, like, just fundamental albums, you know? Like,
Absolutely.
he even recorded fucking Misfits Earth AD. Like, you know, on top of all that SST stuff and like St. Vitus and yeah,
Husker Du.
Husker Du. Oh yeah, on top of like all of like Husker Du, Black Flag, you know, some of the Minutemen stuff, some of the Descendant stuff. Like he had to handle a lot of things.
All
And
kinds of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing that I thought was cool was later on, sort of around the late 90s, after he had moved away from California and sort of moved away from that whole SST scene, he kind of had a small hand in the beginnings of the folk punk scene.
Was not aware of that.
Because there was a band called This Bike is a Pipe Bomb from Pensacola, Florida, who met him at a show early on, and they were just like, he had been teaching himself how to play the violin and or the fidola, as he's credited as playing on like the one or two records of theirs that he was on. And but yeah, he'd been teaching himself this new instrument and met these like young punk rock kids who were playing this kind of weird, like kind of hillbilly country folk punk sound. You know, a lot of like I don't know. They're a pretty fun little band to check out if you ever get a chance.
Awesome.
Their front seat solidarity record is a really good one. But he played on I can't remember, but he played on like one of their first records in the early 90s, and just kind of like very rudimentary, like you know, fiddle sounds in the background of this like kind of down home rootsy folk punk record, and it's really cool. And it was just so like they'd happen to meet at a show and like, hey, do you want to play on a record? And he was like, yeah, sure. And that was just sort of his brief little dally. And they were one of the early bands on Planet X Records, which was kind of yeah, that was kind of one of the big labels of that whole folk punk scene. Like they were kind of one of the initial Planet X bands, and he was part of the early run of that particular band. Also, on top of all of the stuff that he did with SST, just as like a little, you know, just a nice little kind of denouement there. You know, a decade or so after his initial like real heavy impact on the scene. But yeah, he was somebody that it couldn't not mention. It's funny. There's a couple when I was thinking of people that passed this year. There was actually a couple of producers that I had put on my list, and he was one of them. But yeah, so Spot was somebody that I definitely had to include as the first on my list of like notable passings for the year. You know, so rest in peace
That's
for sure.
fantastic, man. No, man, and I'm glad. You know, we sort of. I predict that's not the. You know, I predict that's the first, but not the last kind of area of significant overlap, which we'll get into. And I didn't mean to barge in on your thing there.
No, that's totally fine.
I just like those Rulin books. You know, it's one of these things. It's like I accumulated records, which I made a point of transferring over to BC when I moved here. But then also, you know, I had about probably close to 100 books that I like went to some effort to get, and I just like, well, I don't want to friggin' throw them on friggin' Facebook or Kijiji, so I'm just gonna throw them up the street to where my you know, ex-wife and my kids are. So the friggin' Circle Jerks autobiography is just sitting there unread, and it's like I'm not. It's like nobody in that friggin' house or who passes through there is gonna touch it. So like in 10 years, when my kids aren't living there anymore, I'll be like, okay, can I have that you know, book back? You know, it's so anyway. Nothing to say about drastic changes in a single year, but I will say at about this time last year is when I first started reading. That's when I kind of read the Jim Ruland friggin' Bad Religion book, and then also the SST book on the Kindle format right around the same time, about a year ago. So, anywho, I think for my first one, you know, the first one I thought of, which I mean, I don't know, it's not somebody who's like stood out for me as a huge presence over the years, but for whatever reason, the first name that I thought of for this was Van Connor.
Yeah.
Bass player for the Screaming Trees. Yeah. And I don't even like have like a huge deep affinity for the Screaming Trees catalog as a whole, simply because it's kind of like more on the psychedelic side of punk
Hmm.
and alternative music.
Yeah.
But they got two friggin' perfect albums with Sweet Oblivion and Dust, the follow up to
Yeah.
that. And I think probably Uncle Anastasia, the record before that, and actually they were one of they talking about SST Records. They put out 3 or 4 records. They sort of recorded their first 2 albums just locally with
Hmm.
like the best guy in Ellisburg, Washington at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, much to their surprise, in like 1983, so they're like sort of a second wave SSD band, like
Hmm.
not with the Descendants and Minutemen and Black
Yeah.
Flag, but when they started sort of reaching out around elsewhere in the Americas, notably
Hmm.
the West, that's where they sort of, caught wind, or the Pacific as well as the Northwest, because SST also put out like the first Soundgarden
Oh
LP.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, anything to do with grunge, really,
Hmm.
ultimately, like without SST, grunge wouldn't have existed in any way
Hmm.
that people recognize now. Which this is not new information, but
Yeah.
but to the extent that like for a band just starting out of the gate, 20, 19, 20, just right out of high school, within three
Hmm.
years of being out of high school, to be on an SSD
Hmm.
records and on a trajectory where they ended up on a major label, with it's just, and then significantly, Mark Lanigan had a huge career, which I'm
Oh
just kind
yeah.
of still discovering his records.
Hmm.
So it's like, it's like, well, why the bass player? It's just like, well, it just the dude was part of a moment. He sort of started out as just this kind of miscreant with his brother in his their family rec room, and they
Hmm.
taught themselves their instruments just listening to records, like Frampton and Hendrix and Black Sabbath and whatever. And then just they associated with the other friggin' oddball friggin' miscreants in their
Hmm.
area, and they just kind of went forward within the to the it really just putting in huge amounts of hard work. And like I said, Sweet Oblivion and Dust I'll hold up against anything in the 90s. Those are both just amazingly, solid records in every kind of sense. So, yeah, that was the first. Van Connor from Screaming Trees
Ah,
is the first person I thought of, the first person I thought of on this list. So,
nice.
yeah, so who's your number two, man?
My number two is it's Rick Froberg from who I guess is probably most well known for the band Drive Like Jehu. Uh, he also played in Hot Snakes and Pitchfork. He's played in a few other bands in the San Diego area, but Drive Like Jehu are probably the biggest one. Are you still there, Matt? I think I lost Matt. Um, Matt's back.
Please continue, dude.
All right.
Yeah,
Anyways,
yeah.
yeah. So Rick Froberg is yeah, he's a musician and visual artist from San Diego, California. Like I said, he's most known for playing in the band Drive Like Jehu, who were yeah, a big band out of
Hugely
San Diego in the
influential.
early.
If y'all
Exactly,
children
hugely
like the emo
influential.
music, you're gonna like this, right?
And
That's
one of the cool things about that, they really kind of they had a real fortuitous circumstance, I guess you could say, where
oh,
their other guitarist, John Reese, played in a band like around the same time, like concurrent to being in Drive Like Jehu, started a sort of tongue-in-cheek rock and roll band called Rocket from the Crypt. That
they're awesome.
yeah,
Rocket from the
exactly,
Crypt freaking
yeah,
rule. What
and
do you? Yeah. Okay.
actually Rick Froberg did a lot of like the album artwork for Rocket from the Crypt as well while
I
they were
did not
around. Like
know
it was
that.
just kind of like, even though he wasn't,
Okay.
he didn't play he wasn't a musician in the band, he still had a big part of their visual presentation for like a good run of their albums. And it's just part of that whole little, like, San Diego didn't have a huge scene at that time, but he was like at the center of what was there. And yeah, when Rocket from
Heroin
the
was from
Crypt,
San Diego, I think.
Exactly. And Heroin was from there. Unbroken, who were like a very popular straight edge band, they were from there. Uh, I'm trying to think.
A few others.
The
Yeah.
Locust, like a few other bands, like San
The
Diego.
Locust.
It's not.
Oh my Christ! I
Yeah,
can't believe
like,
this is the first time we're mentioning the Locust on this show. I
and
can't believe
actually,
it.
I guess the one of the guys from the Locust's dad's band, who I quite enjoy, Battalion of Saints, who are like sort of more like from the '80s in San
What?
Diego. But
What? You're shitting me.
anyways, yeah.
Okay, I'm new information, folks. New
So,
information.
anyways, when the major labels came sniffing around Rocket from the Crypt, I believe the apocryphal story was that John Reese said, like, look, if you want to put out this band, you got to put out my other band, Drive Like Jehu, as well,
Oh,
who had already put out one really great self-titled album on Headhunter Records at that point. Um, so yeah, then they ended up putting out their album, their second album, Yank Crime, on a major label because of sort of getting the boost from Rocket from the Crypt, and
awesome name
it
for a
became
record.
and it's a fucking great album, and it was just a very accessible kind of like heavy post-hardcore album at a time when there weren't a ton of those getting a lot of getting released on a major label. Like the closest you were going to get was like a Helmet or something like that, as far as that kind of really kind of just.
I discovered Helmet
Or
again
i've
recently,
I,
and
I've thrown them on a
Helmet
couple
is
times here
actually
and there.
cool, man. I
Yeah.
think,
Well,
but
I remember their guitarist had there was a whole, like, his whole thing was like he was a jazz guitarist who chose to play like Helmet kind of
yes,
riffs. But
yes, that's right. Page
anyway,
Hamilton. That's
and
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I've been revisiting Quicksand a lot lately now since they're kind of a thing
Yes.
again from
Holy
that, just of
crap!
that kind of sound. But like, like Drive Like Jehu were kind of one of the really earlier kind of bigger bands, like, to play
With
that
that
kind of
sound,
sound on
yeah. Okay.
on that kind of stage. And Rick Froberg was a huge part of that. And then he also played guitar in Hot Snakes, which was the band that most of those dudes had afterwards.
Okay.
Who I found out I found about the existence I found out about the existence of by way of a band in Newfoundland covering them. Because I just, in that pre-internet era, I just didn't know that the Jehu guys had a new band. And then, there was, when I lived in St. John's, there was this one band that I'd see all the time who would always had this one song that I quite enjoyed. So I was told, like, yeah, man, that song Automatic Midnight, that's a really great song that you guys have. I'm like, yeah, too bad we didn't write it. Haven't you heard Hot Snakes? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And I'm like, oh, I should hear Hot Snakes. And also, I really regret not seeing his Rick Froberg's last kind of big band, Obits, when they played the Halifax Pop Explosion back in the 2000 teens. But yeah, like I said, he was a huge part of that San Diego sound. He was even an early member, like I said, he was even an early member of the band Crash Worship, who were
Okay.
like, they were kind of like, they were really influential on a lot of like the heavy kind of like post metal, I guess you could say, like Neurosis and that kind of stuff, which eventually influenced like Godspeed You Black Emperor. But like Crash Worship was just like a lot of people banging on drums and setting things on fire in like art spaces in San Diego. And Rick Froberg was one of those early people banging on drums while people were setting things on fire at Crash Worship shows. Um, but yeah, he passed away at the end of June, at the age of 55, from like an undiagnosed heart condition. So it was just one of those things. And yeah, like he had still, was still fairly active in making music. Like, like everybody still fucking loves Drive Like J. I think those bands, like, yeah. And he was somebody that I definitely had to like include on my list, because like I said, especially for those Jehu albums alone, like those were huge records. Like, and yeah, so rest in peace, Rick Froberg. That's my number 2.
Rest in power,
Rest
Rick
in power.
Froberg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was sick, and I'm just going to go to the next one. Is kind of I guess I was surprised to learn about it. Only to the extent that, like, why didn't this pierce my social media bubble? You know, before now, I didn't discover this until about 6 months after
Mm-hmm.
it actually occurred. But yeah, Andrew Lang, the original drummer for Leatherface, and also he
Oh
drummed for
yeah.
the Cockney. He drummed for the Cockney Rejects.
Okay.
So I haven't heard, and I think he may have been part of the Snuff sort of scene
Oh yeah,
together
Snuff.
as
Yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah. That band.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because they kind of all kind of go together
Yeah.
in terms of like the Leatherface family tree is kind of how I think
Exactly.
of it.
Yeah.
It's not like this guy's like this, super consummate or super accomplished musician.
Mm.
But I would just say that only to the and like I couldn't, is like, do I know fucking what his hobbies are? Do I know,
Hmm.
like the complete opposite of a famous person, really. But I have to like say, well, it's like this guy, he's on all the Leatherface records up until the last two or three, and he like pursued a career basically as a cook, from what I can
Hmm.
tell. Working kitchens and whatnot, and then just did tours and recording with Leatherface when he was able to. So that's literally the extent of it. I can't say like, oh, the culture, or oh, whatever.
Hmm.
But it's just sort of, I think his story is like, first of all, I mean, the dude was a fucking powerful drummer,
Yep.
and he was just on like, I mean, you can't imagine Mush without just the the super
Hmm.
like all of
Oh
the
yeah.
fills, and just
Yep.
hitting it. He had like a double kick drum. One of the earlier proponents of that on the post-hardcore scene in England,
Hmm.
as I've come to understand. And but it's just, again, it's just sort of like, the working person who aspires to do cool music wherever they are is
Hmm.
always fighting an uphill battle. And you can either be really astute and really lucky and sort of cobble together kind of a living at it, or for the most part, it's like you're playing in a friggin' weekend band,
Hmm.
and that weekend man may prove legendary, but I'm telling you, like Quicksand coming back out now, and all these bands like you didn't hear records from for quite a while. Oh, I'm telling you, they were fucking working jobs,
Oh, for
and
sure.
now they're coming now to the end where they got some leverage. Their friggin' kids have kind of become
Hmm.
self-sustaining or whatever, and they're like, yeah, let's friggin' so whatever, you're friggin' like some band from friggin' like North Carolina that only put out an album and a half,
Hmm.
or something, but they were all great, and now they're still kind of working and living in the area, and they're like,
Yep.
yeah, let's just fuck it, let's just put out a 12-inch or something, or whatever. So really, that's a huge digression. But again, just much respect to the passing of a very key friggin' component of some of my favorite music ever. So there we go. Andrew Lang, rest in power. That was my number
Uh,
two. Who's your number
all
three,
right.
man?
My number three is a local one, actually.
Do tell.
Um, it was one that actually hit kind of hard because it was a surprise. It was Halifax musician Ben Brennan,
Oh,
who passed away back in, I think it was April of this year. Yeah, um, yeah. The Exclaim article I found passed. Yeah, I think was like, yeah, dated in April. But yeah, he was somebody that like he played in a ton of bands locally for probably the past like decade and a half or so. Like I seem to remember, like I think Castle Wolfenstein was the band that he played guitar in that I first remember seeing around, like say like around like 2009, 2010, and it
I
was one
love
of
that
those.
name for a band.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, as somebody who discovered Doom on fucking PC computer when it first came out, and my friend who like could afford a much better computer than me,
yeah,
like, I appreciate that. But yeah,
yeah.
that's
That was his. That was actually that was a band he was in with Cody Gugu, who had mentioned as like the local musician who had followed across many projects, and it was kind of like they were like the band that the folks that were going to have a big influence on the more interesting side of heavy music in Halifax for like most of that next decade, all kind of started out in. And from there, I guess the next big band that he was in was called Word on the Street. who were kind of more like a straight ahead, like, fast hardcore band. He also played in a band called A Sight for Sewn Eyes, who were pretty like they were label mates with Alexis on Fire, and had like a couple albums out in like the 2000 teens. But while playing in like this kind of, and they were like kind of more like like a techie metalcore kind of band, and that was almost like his day job. As far as like a local musician can have a band that's a day job, like and then, but he was always playing in all these other weird little projects. Like he had a band called Weed Thief, that were just like a bass, drums, and vocals, like noise rock band that, when I was doing a lot of stand up and like doing stand up at like DIY punk rock shows, like they were a band that I did a lot of shows with, like in like sort of the early part of the previous decade, I guess you could say. And Ben just played in a lot of different bands like that. He was also in a band called Surveillance, who were like kind of more like a melodic indie pop, almost like Eric Strippish type thing, who were like pretty popular around this way. And um had his hands just like in a bunch of different musical projects over like I said, over the past like decade and a half or so. And it was pretty, kind of surprised everybody when he passed away in April. Like he was only 29 years old, and
Yeah.
had done
Oh,
like,
shit,
even at
that's
that age, had still like, the guy's got a pretty
solid
significant,
resume.
pretty
Yeah.
pretty solid resume of releases even at that age. And even like local band Botfly, who were like kind of like the biggest thing to come out of here recently, like their album cover is just like an arty black and white photo of Ben smoking a cigarette outside one of their shows.
Huh.
Like, and he was like really close with all those kind of guys as well. And it was just like, it was one of those things that it hit the Halifax scene really hard when he passed away. So like, yeah,
So, I mean,
definitely
was it
had
under
to.
tragic circumstances or what? I mean, it's sad
It's
when,
just, it's one of those, like, there weren't a whole lot of details we weren't going to ask. I figure it's probably just one of those,
yeah, yeah,
things that
things that happen
happens
in a life.
when in
Yeah.
a life. Yeah, exactly. And like
Okay,
I
fair
said, that's
enough.
what made it more of a shock.
Right.
But he's somebody,
Right.
especially even like my own last sort of stint as a performer in the scene locally, like playing, like either like doing stand up or like with my last band that I was in, Forlom, like most of our shows were with like one of Ben's bands.
Okay.
Like at some point or other, like, and
Yeah.
if not, he was like hanging out. So
29 is fucking young. I'm
it
sorry.
is,
I'm just,
and
it's so
especially,
friggin' young.
it
Like,
is, like I said, like shockingly young.
yeah.
Like, and especially since it was one of those things, like, since I realized, like, fuck, like, I was playing shows with that guy a decade ago. And, like, when he was a few bands you know, into his resume, and also playing in this project that was on, like, a fairly big, whatever kind of label, like, for that, sort of like tech metal-y scene. And
Sure.
like, yeah, it was just like, yeah. So it was pretty surprising. But like I said, he was a big part of like the heavier music scene locally for like quite a while here. A good part of the last little while. And I just checked, and you can still get Word on the Street 7-inch Street Spirit from Sewerside Records here in Halifax, or out of here in Halifax. If you ever want to go
Did you say
check them on band.
sewer side records?
Sewerside, yes.
Okay. Okay. Just, I'm
Yeah,
getting
yeah, I
old, so
realize that. I
new
realize, yeah,
devices kind of,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Sewer side, folks. You heard
Sewerside,
it here first.
Sewercide.
Teenage
Um,
sewer side. Don't do
Shaggy
it.
Dog. You probably get it through Shaggy Dog Discs. We'll put it that way, which is the like kind of more like used record distro that the same person runs.
Ah.
That if you're ever looking for interesting, it's worth checking out on Instagram if you ever feel like spending money on records. Which is, an easy hole to fall into.
Completely so.
Yeah. Anyways, sorry to get distracted there, but yeah, for sure. Rest
No,
in power,
man.
Ben Brennan. For sure, had to mention him as part of my list on the show as well. And
Cool.
on the local level, especially since I try to
No,
like
I'm
factor in
I'm
something
I'm I'm
local
I'm
when I
I'm I'm
can.
glad to have I'm glad to speak to that local perspective, because I don't really have you know that much, just because in terms of that, because I've just been
Yeah.
kind of moving around. It's like I did a security check for my job really
Hmm.
not that long ago, like because
Oh, the address list.
well, oh my
Oh,
god, they want you to go back 10 years, man.
oh yeah,
For, for,
no, even
for
I
like a level 2 clearance,
yeah,
like enhanced reliability or whatever.
yeah.
And it's like, so I basically 9 addresses and 9 jobs. And
Hmm.
I had to like, so who was my freaking supervisor at the time? And what's their phone number? And just like, glad I got it through, but still, man. So I'm just it's like I was sort of mentioning to my girlfriend over the weekend who's like just lived in St. John,
Hmm.
had mostly the same job for the past however long,
Yeah.
and it's just like that just must be so unique and enjoyable.
Mm.
So glad to have some local representation,
Yeah.
and I guess now maybe I'll just uh, we're about middle of the show ish. So I think probably we can sort of props do sort of a combined thing here because I think
Yeah.
this will be something for both of us. I'm gonna say you already referred to earlier. We had the passing of Sinead O'Connor, but then
Yeah.
also Shane McGowan, right?
Yes, 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 yes,
So
yes,
two
exactly.
Irish friggin'
Yeah.
superstars gone within months of
Hmm.
each other. I mean,
Yeah.
where's the friggin' where in the universe is that permitted to happen? I have to ask. So I mean,
And not
rather than even just sort of going on like, well, here's my thoughts on this. I mean, I'll just
yeah.
ask you, Cameron, since I'm sure you were going to speak to this anyway. I mean, what were your impressions about either or both of these major artists who we lost?
Well, I mean, I talked about Sinead O'Connor on our like anything but punk episode, but
Yeah,
again, like these are both like two huge. They're both two huge, just massive
larger than
forces,
life.
larger
Yeah.
than life. Like it's when I think about it, like the Pogues are one of the first. Like when I think of like the idea of like something alternative,
Yes.
I think of like Spike from Degrassi wearing a Pogue shirt or
Ah,
something like that. Like that's one of like that's
nice.
like
Very nice.
that's like a formative memory somewhere in the back of young me's head.
No, that's
And
that's
then
legit,
like
man. That's highly legit.
even like going to the UK when I was like in my very early teens with family, like picking up music magazines and seeing articles like they were one of the hottest things, and like they're just one of those bands that was just ubiquitous for so long. I realized I hadn't listened to them for a while, and I realized it was a totally conscious decision because my last sort of stint in the hospitality industry was working as a bouncer as well as a cook at an Irish pub
Oh
that had
my
a lot of
god.
live entertainment, and it was owned by like actual musicians from the Irish folk scene who like moved here to open a bar, and like to
Wow.
the point where like they basically would curate what the entertainment was allowed to play.
Wow.
And a lot of those songs overlap with the Pogues catalog to the point where I kind of I burned out on the Irish folk for a while there, I have to admit.
Fair enough.
But at the same time, like as soon as I heard that he was passing, ended up putting on Rum Sodomy and the Lash, because I mean that's kind of like
Oh,
I feel like that's the
such a
album.
good record. Such a good
So,
record.
and it's
Oh
just
man.
like it's like I hear 10 seconds of A Pair of Brown Eyes and I'm already just like and I always thought it
Yeah.
was amazing that like you know you first hear them and then you realize you look into how many of their songs are originals versus how many are like traditional or like by kind of like more well-known Irish roots artists
Yep.
and just like their reinterpretations. But the fact that like shit, the original songs like could stand toe to toe with all that stuff, and it's just like these fucking sad, dark, just heartbreaking like short stories of like urban life in Ireland and London and everywhere. Like the guy lived a hell of a life. And I remember there was a meme going around that he died at age 65 or 112 in Irish poet years.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that was on the hard times. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, like it's just like of course like yeah, the guy, he was just
There's a there's
he
a
was
there's
he
a
wasn't
there's a
just a
picture of him
musician.
like
he was
there's
a
like a
literary
picture.
force, not
He
just a musician.
was in his
Yeah,
own right. And there's
exactly.
speaking of things that, like to do with him on the internet. I mean, you must have seen this. There's like the picture from like of like Bruce Springsteen, who's like the same age,
Yeah.
and he's like touring Ireland. He's like visiting him, visiting
Hmm.
Shane, earlier this year, and he's like kind of towering over him and like just come here, you, and Shane's sitting there just like, clearly, incapacitated, and he's just looking up at him, and his
Hmm.
eyes are just like, is he friggin' terrified, or is that what love looks like between two legends, or what? But it was a hell of a thing. My favorite by them, by the Pogues, that is, Hell's Ditch for their
Oh
records.
yeah,
I'm
that's
just
a good
like,
one too.
oh my God. For me, that was like the record. I came back from Korea after a stint, and I was in the B.Ed program at St. Thomas
Hmm.
University, and I was about to go on a career as an educator, you know, including a stint in Qatar that I was about 7 or 8 months away from that I didn't know about, and feeling really just like, wonder what's going on with my life, at this point, but feeling, and Moonye, my kid's mom, she remained in Korea for a period. So I was by myself. I was living in this friggin' generic apartment block place on Regent Street with my dad, who just like, well, I'll save some money and live with my, large adult son, and I'm listening to it on this friggin' small, friggin' shitty boombox in my room on CD, and I'm just like, this fucking speaks to me now. And I think everybody kind of has their own origin story in terms of how they encountered the Pogues and what the lighting was like in the room and everything else. You could almost go that far with it. So I mean, it's just you can't. I mean, it's like who's the most expected person to die? Shane McGowan. But
Mm,
nevertheless, it hurts. So
exactly. Well, I mean,
and then we have friggin' Sinead, who
yeah,
we both spoken to a lot already, but it's just like, whew, one light gone and then another, just
exactly.
so. I mean, what else have we got, man? What else, have you got any more personal recollections about this? I mean, this is a pretty hard one to deal with, in my opinion.
I was gonna say, did you see the video? One thing that really, I mean, it's the holiday season, so of course this is the one time you end like
Oh,
a lot of people end up, and there was, oh my god, it ripped. I got to say, it ripped my
thanks for
heart out.
mentioning this, by the
Did you
way. This
see
is great.
the? Did you see there was a video from Shane McGowan's memorial service of what's Glenn Hansard, the guy from fuck, what's the guy who's in the movie Once, like who
Oh
wrote did
shit.
that whole,
Okay, I
yeah,
know what you mean.
that
Yeah.
whole guy, that guy, yeah, the Once guy. And I'm just, he's actually in like he was in like a band in Ireland for a long time besides this whole music thing, and I can't remember their name for the life of me. But anyways, there's the
But
video of him and the bassist from the Pogues doing Fairy Tale of New York together from Shane McGowan's memorial service, like in the church. And they're just like,
oh wow.
if you just want to have your heart ripped out, like, but in the most beautiful way possible, like you can find that on the internet and throw it on. That is just like, yeah, it's just such a great rendition of it too. Um, but yeah, it's like, it's the guy wrote, like I said, he was like, yeah, like he like he he wrote like these great like short stories of songs on top of like this reinterpretations of like classic Irish folk music, and then also wrote like contributed to the holiday canon, even like even though I do know people, I believe it's someone we both know, who at one point would joke that they had like a personal challenge every year to see how long they could go without hearing Fairy Tale of New York every holiday
Yes.
season, just because it was such a thing. But
Yes.
still, it's it's like I said, it's a great song, one of many great songs
Well, I
by a
mean,
great artist, and like,
if you can contribute something to that is going to sort of outlive you and take on its complete own thing for generations of other people that you
Mhm.
have no idea about and who really are never going to know anything about you personally. I mean, I think that's about, as deep an aspiration as any artist can hope for, really.
Oh, for sure.
So man, I'm just going to ask then, since we kind of, and again, just really Sinead,
Yeah, Sinead.
just, just I can't even sort of speak of
Yeah,
it without getting
she
a
was.
little bit misty eyed,
Oh, for
at the
sure.
tear ducts here to think of it. Um, just
You
such what a powerful, singer, what a powerful
mhm.
presence, standing up to fucking so many people at every stand
Yeah,
in her career, no matter how much she
like
got shat on and fucking demonized by the misogynist fucking, patriarchy, press and everything else. Like, fuck, just she stood up to so many for
oh yeah.
so much, and just for no fucking benefit really, other
Mm,
than wrecking her own career, but
mm.
also being able to look at herself, in the in the mirror every morning. So
Yeah, like there's
that's just fucking amazing, right? That's
yeah, like there's I don't know if there's ever been another artist like her. Like she's I believe I said this is the kind of thing that like I don't know. I think I said this when we talked about it before, but in my mind, she's like, when you think of that canon, like your Dylans and your Bob Marleys and your
totally,
whatnots,
totally. She's
like
up there.
she
She's
is
she's part of that for
fucking
sure.
standing right at that level to me. Like
Shoulder
she
to
is an
shoulder.
artist that is shoulder to shoulder with all of them. Like,
Absolutely so.
just on her first three albums alone, even. And it's like she's the kind of like, I think it was Showtime was the network that did the documentary about her a couple of years ago. I think within
Didn't see it.
fairly recently. They did
Okay.
it was like a feature length documentary about her on like one of these cable networks fairly recently that you can find on Crave TV if you have access to that streaming service.
Okay.
Um, but like watching that, like I couldn't believe like I didn't know just how much she persevered through to get to the point of even putting out her first album. Like or to even get to the point of being a recording artist. Like the things she lived through to that point would be
Trauma. A lot of
it's
trauma.
it's the
Yeah.
kind of that yeah, it's the kind of thing that like if they were to make like a biopic about it, like you
Yes.
could just do that section and it would just be, like
She survived
she survived
with a
so
lot that
much.
would wreck other people, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and my dog just decided to push the door open to come in to say hi, I guess, and now right away again. But anyways, yeah. So sorry, I got distracted there. But yeah, she survived so much just to get to the like just constantly. Like she was just it was it seemed like her life was just like a series of battles against some of like just the biggest things you could take on,
Right.
like the Pope, like just so much. Yeah, it just
Well, and even just like converting to Islam later in her life.
exactly.
Um,
And like,
she lost a son to suicide.
yeah,
I mean, Christ. So yeah, rest in power, Sinead, forever.
yeah.
My goodness.
One thing
Not the last. Oh, please do.
I was gonna say one more thing. I read right around the time she passed, I read that apparently she did a lot of donating to like sort of like LGBTQIA charities, especially to like homeless like transgender folks and that kind of
Awesome.
thing. Like a lot of charities to like help support people trying to get back on, so like transgender people who are trying to get back on their feet after experiencing like unhousedness and that kind of thing. Like and would just like donate
Probably
like
very
tons of
high among that
just like
cohort.
donate
Yeah.
like tons of clothes constantly to like shelters and that kind of thing, like all the time. Like, just always like doing good on top of, like all of this amazing art that she made. Like, yeah. So,
Walking it like she talked it.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So I mean, I don't know, man. We're like almost basically at 45 minutes here. I
Yeah.
mean, who else you got? Who else you got on your list that you haven't spoken to so far?
I'll cram a couple of them here together.
Yeah, sure.
They were just two kind of small ones that I was gonna actually the other producer that I was gonna mention, and as well somebody that's more so known for other pursuits but did dabble a bit in music that kind of helped provide the building blocks for something else later on. Uh, the first of which is DJ Mark the 45 King, who passed away in October of this year, October 2019, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, he was 62 years old, and he
Fuck.
was.
I'm like so old now. I just
Oh
hear
yeah,
that and I'm like, that's goddamn young, man.
exactly.
Like, what the
And
fuck? 62? Nobody
yeah,
dies when they're 62. But yeah.
and he was from the Bronx, but he had a big part in sort of helping New Jersey hip hop get on the map because he was a founding member of a crew called the Flavor Unit, uh, who based out of New Jersey, whose biggest member, or I guess their most breakout member, was Queen Latifah, who you might recognize. And
Speaking
he
of
was her
compelling
he was her
origin
tour
stories,
DJ early
folks.
on. Uh,
Yeah.
but and also produced some of the early other members of the Flavor Unit, like Chill Rob G. I think he and Lakim Shabazz. Some of the later members of the group to sort of break out were Naughty by Nature and Redman, who are both pretty popular on their own. But like, he wasn't really as involved at that point because a lot of people have demons once they get into the music industry, as they say.
Fair
And
enough.
by the early night, like he had a big hand in producing Queen Latifah's first couple albums, and was her tour DJ and stuff. He also was really involved with like break beats and like putting out break compilations of break beats where it's just like, here's this little segment of a song that a DJ will then loop. They'll get two copies of the compilation and they'll just use that to loop these two
Ah,
parts.
nice.
um
Very
and
cool.
yeah, he put out a series of those, and he actually was behind a really popular break called the 900 number, that ended up getting sampled by I'm sure if you ended up in a cheesy dance club at some point in the aughts, you might have heard a song called "Let Me Clear My Throat." That has like
Could
this kind
be.
of like. Anyways, that horn part and some of the drums come from a break record called the 900 number that DJ Mark the 45 King put out. That was kind of like, that was like his first big solo breakout, and then he was part of the Flavor Unit with Queen Latifah and other folks. And yeah, like I said, they all kind of distanced themselves from him. Like he ended up kind of flaming out, as it were, career wise in the early 90s. And like losing, he was at the point where like he was getting offered to do remixes for like Madonna and stuff like that, and then just partying a little too much and just, yeah, had to take a break from music for a while.
Right.
um but yeah, like I said, that song "Let Me Clear My Throat," which I guess came out in like the late 90s, but I remember hearing it a lot in like when I was working in crappy bars in Newfoundland in the early aughts. It was the kind of song that would get played a lot there. But they sampled this one record of his. And the other person I want to mention was David McCallum,
Okay.
who
Who's that?
you might recognize more from, he was on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was a Scottish actor who, yeah, he was the Russian guy on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was also on that show NCIS.
This is
But
not who I was expecting to be the next person, folks.
the
The
thing
Russian guy
is,
from Uncle. Okay.
from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the thing is though, in the 60s, he decided to, how sometimes like you'll get like every once in a while an actor will decide they want to put an album out to varying degrees. You'll get your Dog Stars and your 30
Unless you're
Seconds to
unless you're
Marses and
William
whatnots.
Shatner, this is a very bad idea, and you should never try it, actors.
At the
But
same, well, the thing is, David McCallum had actually studied, like he was trained, like he'd studied music and like composition, classical composition, and that kind of thing. So he put out this album called, it was like music another it was music another side of me, and yeah, there were two instrumental albums: there's music part of me and music a bit more of me. But one of the songs on one of those albums, The Edge, uh you might recognize as the main sample for the song "The Next Episode" by Dr. Dre. The like the dee 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 na na na
I
na na,
am
that
I am
guitar riff.
I am
was sampled from
always
one of
impressed with your encyclopedic knowledge
the thing is
of
though, it's like
very specific aspects of the culture, my friend.
that
And one
particular,
of those
it's
is,
like he worked with David Axelrod, who was like a pretty well-known like producer at that time, who had like done
sure,
like he's the guy that produced like the Electric Prunes and like a bunch of just like you know, like rent, like if it was like if they wanted to put out like if a they wanted to put out like, hey, we want to put out this get these studio musicians to put out like a plausible psychedelic rock record, we'll get David Axelrod to produce it. And like he worked with a lot of like pretty good like, you know, it's that really that classic like 60s instrument, like the kind of thing you would hear in the background of say like a show like The Man from Uncle, or like, you know, like kind of like 60 that like 60s action soundtrack kind of music, I guess is the best way I could describe it. But that song The Edge has ended up being sampled by a bunch of other hip hop artists as well, and
okay.
it's a really good song to listen. It's just a pretty great song on its own. I'm putting it in the case notes, or in the you know, in the show notes. But it's you know, it's like those two. It's one of the. It's like it's almost on par with like the Shatner album and that kind of thing. But it's like the Russian guy from The Man from Uncle, conducts a bunch of like studio jazz musicians to put out a pretty decent instrumental album. And like, you know, like it covers like you know, it covers the Batman theme on the second album. And just like stuff like that. But you know, it's like just for The Edge alone, like it's he kind of got cool points in retrospect from that being, you know, a sample for a pretty iconic, you know, hip hop track. So he was someone that I kind of want to throw in there as well. And just one last one that I'm not going to go into in depth, but Tina Turner, because I mean Tina
Oh
fucking Turner.
shit! How can I have even not thought of her? That's
I
brutal. That's
yeah yeah
how
I
can
had
you know?
forgotten
I
that.
mean, I'm glad we're getting it in here, man. Good
Yeah
job. That's
yeah, I just had to throw that on the end because, like I said, Tina fucking Turner. So that's it for me.
yeah, no. I feel like there's just been such an onslaught throughout the year. So I mean, really, my thank you for that. Really, man. And I guess my last ones here are kind of more perfunctory, but just to kind of throw them in there. So, I mean, we've already talked about Spot, you know. So,
Hmm.
in terms of like, I guess, iconic artists, I mean, Gordon Lightfoot died this year, man.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh Jesus.
so, I mean, that's kind of the last huge
Yeah.
one, last icon on my list. And I can't say, oh, well, it meant so much to me and everything else. But this is something where, you know, it's so ridiculous because like I'm Canadian and I recognize it's like part of my friggin' heritage because the
Yeah.
guy is such a fucking renowned presence, you almost take it for granted. But it wasn't actually until the replacements reconvened, put out a record because their guitarist Slim Dunlap, their second guitarist, had a serious stroke, hit his head falling down from the stroke, and needed medical help basically. So they reconvened prior to their 2015 to 2018, you know, tours. But what they put out an album basically to support him called Songs for Slim.
Okay.
So it was like Paul Westerberg, Tommy Stinson, and then basically two kind of local dudes playing the drums and guitars, or the and the second guitar,
Hmm.
and yeah, it was just so within that project, that's how they played a cover. They played a cover of "I'm Not Saying" by Gordon Lightfoot,
Hmm.
and I'm like, this friggin' rules. And then I heard the original, and I was like, this friggin' rules. And then I was at Barnacle Records, downtown Kamloops when I lived there, and I'm like, it's in the oldies section. There's 9 copies, and they're $4 each. I think I'm
Of
good,
course.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but like, you know, in the you know discount vinyl. But I'm like,
Hmm.
I threw it on, and it's just like this is friggin' beautiful, amazing. powerfully written
Yeah.
music. But
Oh
I
yeah.
also, but it's just like, if it hadn't have been for a replacements recording, just kind of incidentally, a bunch of years back, I wouldn't have necessarily tuned into it on a personal level, I
Mm.
suppose.
It was.
And then I'm like, yeah, so he's an icon. He's to all the folks who have much more meaningful and substantive connections to the music. I hope it isn't too hard for you, basically. So,
Mhm.
and did I have? I don't know if I had any other person on my list. Oh yeah, 6'2" Rodriguez.
Oh yeah.
I just, for anybody who's watched the Searching for Sugar Man documentary, which was fascinating about
Mm.
how this, guy from Detroit who basically records like one or two albums and has a completely undistinguished friggin' working class career. It's like the guys from Death, it's
Yeah.
like they recorded like, one of the most amazing friggin' albums. Nobody heard it, and they went on to like work just like the most mind-numbing friggin' whatever jobs because that's
Mhm.
just what they had to do. And then it turns out that he was really popular in in right as apartheid was about to come down in South Africa. He got
Mm.
really hugely popular, but because he signed for such horribly bad contractual terms with his recordings, he had no way of knowing it, and he had no way of getting any money off it
Mhm.
until the online era happened and people were able to actually track him down, and he was able to sort of, after like a 20-year gap, resume a career as a recording and touring artist. So again, I just like don't have any deep personal connection to the music whatsoever, but it seemed like a notable narrative, if you
Mhm.
will. Searching for Sugar Man, it won some awards, in terms of a higher profile music documentary that came out probably 7 or 8 years ago, I want to say,
Yeah.
maybe at this point.
Something like
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, it just if you're looking for something to kill some time on your evening off during the holidays, you can do a lot worse, basically.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much all I got, man.
All right.
Can I ask you one sort of final random question before we go out of
Yeah.
here, Ian?
Sure.
How are you friggin' enjoying the Shotmaker box set, dude?
Oh, it's
Are you
so
listening
good.
to it? Have you listened to it a bunch or not
I
yet?
have listened to it a bit. It is quite good. It is quite good. And it's
Yeah.
it's such a nice
It's so
package
nice,
too.
so vinily, and
Yeah.
you put it on, and they friggin' remastered it, which it was like basically, you were listening to the same podcast episode that I did, like Nick Pyle. He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we were completely poor. We had to record at night on the worst equipment, and it was like middle of the night, one album, 2 days, and we wish we could have done more, but we were so goddamn poor.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, to me, I'm just like, dude, you're telling me what adds to it for
Mhm.
me, right? They kind of come
For sure.
through. So, if you're looking for the, you know, uh, Southern Ontario mid '90s emo, which is all the rage now, in the that's the Alexis on Fire has some fucking ridiculous box set that's coming out. I mean,
Oh wow.
it's yeah, with on friggin' brooklynvegan.com, no less.
Okay.
So like you're doing a curated, box set with them. So it's like you're talking now. It's just like, yeah, I saw it on like a thing. It's like, yeah, it's got that Southern Ontario mid '90s emo sound, and I'm like, are you fucking on drugs?
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, like, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's yes, I can identify. It's like yeah, exactly. It's
I,
like
I
you
relate
hate
to
that it
this, and
exists,
I
but you know
am
what I
of
mean.
that
Yeah,
demographic. Thank you. Like,
yeah.
so okay, well,
All
just
right.
thought I'd ask. I noticed on your social thing you posted
Yes,
a
yes.
picture of it. So
Yeah, it was kind of an impulse purchase, but I was pretty excited
well
to
done,
get a
man. Good
copy.
choice.
And I
Totally.
guess they were. I think the original run is sold out now. So
Well, that means
that's
I
when
may be putting it up on eBay because there's now a scarcity value.
Yeah, I realized it's the third time I've purchased some of that music. Like at least two of the
Yeah,
three LPs is stuff that I'd already owned. Like
over the decades,
yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. I'd owned
yeah.
the original records, and then I ended up buying like because it was the double CD discography that came out in the aughts. Like
Which sounded
yeah,
like shit and wasn't really well
yeah,
curated at all, but it was like, oh
exactly.
wow, it's better than nothing.
It
So
was something. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyways,
Okay.
I think
Well,
my dog is bugging me to go outside right now. So
I think you should totally follow
yeah,
that.
I think I better
It's
let
been a
him
great
out.
time,
So
everybody.
all
Take
right.
care, and we'll be back hopefully once more before the new year. But
Yeah, yeah.
in any case, have a great night. Take care, and bye for now.
All right. Bye for now.